Heart
Heart
transplant waiting
transplant
lists
waiting
reach
lists
record
reach
high,
record high,
with doubling
with
in number
doubling in
waiting.
number waiting.
Heart
Heart
transplant waiting
transplant
lists
waiting
are at a
lists are
record
at a
high,
record
with the
high,
numbers
with the
waiting more
numbers
than
waiting
doubling
more
in a
than doubling
decade.
in a decade.
Experts said the
Experts
number
said
of
the
hearts
number of heart
donations is
donation
failing
is
to keep
failing to
pace
keep
with
pace
growing
with
demand,
growing
and
demand
advances in
and
medicine
advances
which are
in
keeping
medicine
some
which are
patients
keep
on the
some
lists
patients
for
on the list
longer.
for longer.
The annual
The
figures
annual
show
figures show
295
295
patients
patients
waiting,
waiting,
up from
up from
126 in
126 in
2010,
2010,
with an
with an
average wait
average
of
wait
3
of 3
years to
years
transplant.
to
More than
transplant. More than
200 people
200
have
people have
died in the
died
last
in the
5
last
years
5
while waiting
years
for
while
such
waiting for such
operations.
operations.
Ministers today
Ministers
pleaded
today
for more
plead for
families
more
to
families
discuss
to discuss
donations ahead
donations
of
ahead of
changes to
changes
law
to law
on organ
on organ
donation,
donation,
which will
which
take
will take
place
place
next year.
next year.
From next year,
From next
England
year,
and
England
Scotland
and
will move to
Scotland
a
will
system
move to
of
a system of
opt-out donation,
opt-out
with
donation,
consent
with
presumed
consent
unless
presumed
people
unless
record a
people
decision
record
not to
decision not
donate.
to donate.
John Mangay,
John Mangay,
director of
director of
policy at the
policy at
British
the
Heart
British Heart
Foundation,
Foundation,
said,
said,
"Hundreds of
hundreds of
people
people
across the
across the
country are
country
on the
are on the
waiting list
waiting
for a
list
heart
for a heart
transplant at
transplant
any
at
one
any
time.
time.
And sadly,
And sadly,
not
not
everyone will
everyone
receive
will
the
receive the
transplant that they
transplant
desperately
that they
need.
desperately
The
need.
introduction of the
The
law in
introduction of
England
the
and
law in
Scotland
England and Scotland
means we will
means we
switch to
will
a soft
switch to a
opt-out
soft
system,
opt-out
which
system,
will provide
which
much
will
hope
provide much
for
hope
those
for
on the
those
heart
on the heart
transplant waiting
transplant
list.
waiting list.
Lindsay
Lindsay
Fitzpatrick,
Fitzpatrick,
34,
34,
from the
from
World,
the war,
will have been
will have
waiting
been
for
waiting
3
for 3
years
years
on
on
Saturday.
Saturday.
She
She
said,
said,
"I have had
I
health
have had
problems my
health
whole
problems
life.
my whole life.
Throughout my
Throughout
life,
my
I have
life, I
struggled
have
with my
struggled with
mobility,
my mobility,
breathlessness, and
breathlessness, and
exhaustion on a
exhaustion
daily
on a daily
basis.
basis.
I have
I
to
have
use
to
a
use a
wheelchair or
wheelchair or
mobility
mobility
scooter when I'm
scooter
out
when
and
I'm
about.
out and
I
about.
know it is
I
hard
know
for
it is
people to
hard for
talk
people
about
to talk
organ
about
donation,
organ donation,
but for
but
people
for
like
people
me
like me
and many
and many
others that are
others
waiting
that are
for a
waiting for a
heart,
heart,
that
that
conversation could
conversation
save
could
our
save our
lives,"
lives,
she
she
said.
said.
Heart
Heart
transplant waiting
transplant
lists
waiting
reach
lists
record
reach
high,
record
with
high,
doubling in
for
number
doubling in
waiting.
number waiting.
Heart
Heart
transplant
transplant
waiting lists
waiting
are at a
lists
record
are at a
high,
record
with the
high,
numbers
with the
waiting more
numbers
than
waiting more
doubling
than
in a
doubling
decade.
in a decade.
Experts said the
Experts said
number
the
of
number
hearts
of heart
donations is
donations is
failing
in
to keep
failing to
pace
keep
with
pace
growing
with growing
demand and
demand,
advances
and
in
advances
medicine
in
which are
medicine
keeping
which are
some
keeping
patients
some
on the
patients
lists
on the
for
list for
longer.
longer.
The annual
The annual
figures show
figures show
295
295
patients
patients
waiting,
waiting,
up from
up from
126 in
126 in
2010,
2010,
with an average wait
with
of
an
3
average
years
wait
to
of 3 years
transplant.
to
More than
transplant. More
200
than
people have
200 people
died in
have
the
died
last
in the
5
last
years
5
while
years
waiting
while
for such
waiting for such
operations.
operations.
Ministers today
Minister
pleaded
today
for more
plead for more
families to
families
discuss
to discuss
donations ahead
donations
of
ahead
changes
of
to
changes
law
to law
on
on
organ
organ
donation,
donation,
which will
which
take
will
place
take
next
place
year.
next year.
From next
From
year,
next year,
England and
England
Scotland
and
will move to a
Scotland will
system
move to
of
a system of
opt-out
opt-out
donation, with
donation,
consent
with
presumed
consent
unless
presumed
people
unless
record a
people
decision
record a
not to
decision
donate.
not to donate.
John
John
Mangay,
Mangay, a
director of
director of
policy at the
policy
British
at the
Heart
British
Foundation,
Heart
said,
Foundation, said,
"Hundreds of
hundreds
people
of
across
people
the
across
country
the
are on the
country are on the
waiting list
waiting
for a
list
heart
for a heart
transplant at
transplant
any
at
one
any
time.
one time.
And
And
sadly,
sadly,
not
not
everyone will
everyone will
receive the
receive the
transplant that they
transplant that they
desperately need.
desperately need.
The
The
introduction of the law
introduction
in
of the law
England
in
and
England and
Scotland
Scotland
means we will
means we
switch
will
to a
switch to a
soft
soft
opt-out
opt-out
system,
system,
which will
which will
provide much
provide
hope
much hope
for those on
for
the
those
heart
on the heart
transplant waiting
transplant
list.
waiting list.
Lindsay
Lindsay
Fitzpatrick,
Fitzpatrick,
34,
34,
from the
from
World,
the war,
will
will
have been
have been
waiting for
waiting for
3
3
years
years
on
on
Saturday.
Saturday.
She
She
said,
said,
"I have
I
had
have
health
had
problems
health
my whole
problems my
life.
whole life.
Throughout my life, I have struggled with my
Struggle with my
mobility,
mobility,
breathlessness, and
breathlessness, and
exhaustion on a
exhaustion on a
daily
daily
basis.
basis.
I have
I
to
have
use
to
a
use a
wheelchair or
wheelchair or
mobility scooter
mobility
when I'm out
scooter
and about.
when I'm
I
out
know
and
it is
about.
hard for
I
people
know
to
it is
talk
hard for
about
people
organ
to talk
donation,
about organ
but
donation,
for people
but for
like
people
me
like me
and many
and many
others that are
others
waiting
that
for
are
a
waiting
heart,
for a heart,
that
that
conversation
conversation
could save our
could
lives,"
save our
she
lives,
said.
she said. I know it is hard for people to talk about organ donation, but for people like me and many others that are waiting for a heart, that conversation could save our lives, she said. out and about 户外活动 I feel quite relaxed when I'm out and about. Scooter 电动代步车 A light motorcycle usually with small wheels and a curved metal covered at the front to protect the rider's leg. Nowadays, riding a scooter is becoming a new fashion. Nowadays, 精疲力竭 exhaustion, the state of being very tired. Her face was gray with exhaustion, breathlessness, 气喘吁吁 breathless, 不能呼吸的 He arrived breathless at the top of stairs. Mobile 移动的 mobility 行走能力 automobile, the ability to move or travel around easily. An electric wheelchair has given her greater mobility. Mobile 移动的行走能力 mobility 名词 struggle with, I'm struggling with my test. I'm struggling with my learning English. Lindsay Fitzpatrick, 34, from the war, will have been waiting for 3 years on Saturday, she said. I have had health problems my whole life. Throughout my life, I have struggled with my mobility, breathlessness, and exhaustion on a daily basis. I have to use a wheelchair or mobility scooter when I'm out and about. The introduction of the law in England and Scotland means we will switch to a soft opt-out system, which will provide much hope for those on the heart transplant waiting list. 句子的主语是 introduction， 谓语是 means， 后接宾语从句。We will switch to a soft opt-out system. 最后是非限定性定语从句，说明引入这项法律的这件事将为等待心脏移植的病人带来很大希望。Switch 转变改变 Switch change shift vary Switch to change or make something change from one thing to another. We are in the process of switching over to a new system of invoicing. We are in the process of switching over to a new system of invoicing. To change or make something change from one thing to another. 绝望的 desperately, in a very desperate way. The doctor tried desperately to save her life. 拼命的绝望的极度的拼命的绝望的极度的绝望的 switch. John Magee, director of policy at the British Heart Foundation, said hundreds of people across the country are on the waiting list for a heart transplant at any one time, and sadly not everyone will receive the transplant that they desperately need. The introduction of the law in England and Scotland means we will switch to a soft opt-out system, which will provide much hope for those on the heart transplant wait list. Presume 假定假设 to suppose that something is true, although you do not have actual proof. They are very expensive, I presume. Consent 同意准许 consent to something, consent to do something. Consent 同意准许 agree 更强调的是同级之间不存在允许准许的意思，较正 consent 允许准许这样的意思较正式，经常用在书面语当中。Her parents finally consented their marriage. Permission to do something, especially given by somebody in authority. He is charged with taking a car without the owner's consent. He is charged with taking a car without owner's consent. 允许、同意、准许做某事 consent. Presume. Opt out 决定退出。 From next year, England and Scotland will move to a system of opt-out donation with consent presumed unless people record a decision not to donate. Ministers today plead for more families to discuss donations ahead of changes to law on organ donation, which will take place next year. Which will take place next year. Which will take place next year. 句子的主干是 Ministers plead for more families to discuss donation. Ahead of changes to law on organ donation 是副词短语，表示时间。Ahead of 最后定语从句 which will take place next year 做进一步限定，说明这项修改的法律开始的时间。Organ 器官 organ a part of the body that has a particular purpose, such as the heart or the brain. Part of plant with a particular purpose. The organ transplant is not a mission impossible in medical field. Ahead of us lay 10 days of intensive training. Plead 呼吁救援 plead for somebody to do something. Plead for somebody to argue in support of somebody something. The United Nations has pleaded for a halt to the bombing. Ministers today pleaded for more families to discuss donations ahead of changes to law on organ donation, which will take place next year. Operation 手术 the process of cutting open a part of a person's body in order to remove or repair a damaged part. Will I need to have an operation? Figure, the leading figure, 身材 She has a nice figure. The leading figure. She has a nice figure. The annual figure showed 295 patients waiting, up from 126 in 2010, with an average wait of 3 years to transplant. The annual figure show 人身材数据 2,295 patients waiting, up from 126 in 2010, with an average wait of 3 years to transplant. More than 200 people have died in the last 5 years while waiting for such operations. Operation figure. Advance 进步 advance of technology, advance of education. Keep pace with 并驾齐驱，保持同步。Our production can't keep pace with the orders coming. Our production can't keep pace with the orders coming. Our production can't keep pace with the orders coming. Donation 捐赠 donation something that is given to a person or an organization such as a charity in order to help them. The act of giving something in this way. Thank you for your generous donation. 慷慨的 generous donation. Donation keep pace with. Our production can't keep pace with the orders coming in. Heart transplant waiting lists are at a record high, with the numbers waiting more than doubling in a decade. Experts said the number of heart donations is failing to keep pace with growing demand, and advances in medicine which are keeping some patients on the list for longer. Record high 达到历史 record low reach record low. The temperature hit reached record high yesterday at 40 degrees. Transplant 移植 a medical operation in which a damaged organ is replaced with one from another person. Now heart transplant is possible. Heart transplant waiting list heart recordly high with doubling in number waiting. Transplant reach record high, reach record low. donation keep pace with advance figure 数据人 figure 人物领先 the leading figure 身材 she has a nice figure operation plead 呼吁声援呼吁 plead for somebody to do something plead for somebody ahead of 在什么什么之前器官 organ opt out 决定退出 default consent 同意准许 consent 同意准许 agree 同意 consent 动词同意准许 consent to do something presume 假定假设 presume desperately 极度的绝望的拼命的 switch shift change vary 变化 struggle with mobility mobile 移动的 breathlessness breathless exhaustion scooter out and about out 户外活动 when I'm out and about
Heart transplant waiting lists reach record high, with doubling in number waiting.
Number waiting.
Heart transplant waiting lists are at a record high, with the numbers waiting more than doubling in a decade.
Heart transplant waiting lists reach record high. 等待心脏移植的病人人数达到历史最高，人数翻了一番。With doubling in number waiting. 等待心脏的移植的历史。With the number waiting more than doubling in a decade.
Experts said the number of heart donations is failing to keep pace with growing demand, and advances in medicine which are keeping some patients on the list for longer. The annual figures show donations is
专家表示 expert said the number of heart donations 心脏供体的数量 is failing to keep pace with growing demand 无法满足需求的增长，而医学的进步 advances in medicine 使得病人的等候时间更长 which are keeping some patients on the list for long.
Failing to keep pace with growing demand, and advances in medicine which are keeping some patients on the lists for longer. The annual figures show 295 patients waiting, up from 126 in 2010, with an average wait of 3 years to transplant. More than 200 people have died in the last 5 years while waiting for such operations.
年数据显示 the annual figures show 等待换心的患者从2010年的126人增长到295人。295 patients waiting, up from 126 in 2010, with an average waiting for 3 years to transplant. 平均等待时间为3年。More than 200 people have died in the last 5 years. More than 200 people have died in the last 5 years while waiting for such operations. 在过去5年中，已有超过200名患者在等待换心中去世。
Ministers today pleaded for more families to discuss donations ahead of changes to law on organ donation, which will take place next year. From
今天，部长们呼吁更多的家庭在明年修改器官捐赠法律之前，与家人先讨论器官捐赠事宜。
Next year, England and Scotland will move to a system of opt-out donation, with consent presumed unless people record a decision not to donate. John May.
From next year, 自明年起，英格兰和苏格兰地区将开始推行器官默认捐赠制度，即默认所有人都已同意捐献，除非他们注册表明自己不捐。Remote system to opt-out donation with consent presumed unless people record a decision record a decision not to donate.
Gay, Director of Policy at the British Heart Foundation, said, "Hundreds of people across the country are on the waiting list for a heart transplant at any one time, and sadly, not everyone will receive the transplant that they desperately need. The introduction of the law in England and Scotland means we will switch to a soft opt-out system, which will provide much hope for those on the heart transplant waiting list." Lindsay
John Magee, Director of Policy, 英国心脏基金会 British Heart Foundation 政策主任 Director of the Policy, 约翰麦杰表示，不论何时 hundreds of people across the country at any one time 全国都有数百人在等候心脏移植。但是不幸的是，并不是所有人都能等到他们急需的心脏供体。And sadly, not everyone will receive the transplant that they desperately need. 这项法律在英格兰和苏格兰的引入 introduction of the law in England and Scotland means we will switch provide much hope for those on the heart transplant waiting list. 这向等待心脏移植的病人带来很大的希望，将变为默认捐赠的软制度，这将为等待心脏移植的病人带来很大的希望。Provide much hope for those on the heart transplant waiting list.
My whole life. Throughout my life, I have struggled with my mobility, breathlessness, and exhaustion on a daily basis. I have to use a wheelchair or mobility scooter when I'm out and about. I know it is.
Lindsay Franz Patrick, 34, from the war. 来自威拉尔的林德西·菲斯帕特里克 （Fitzpatrick）， 今年34岁。到这周六，他等待心脏移植的时间就满3年了。他说：“我一生被各种健康问题所困扰。I have had health problems. 说每一天我都不良于行，并与呼吸困难与疲劳做斗争。而外出时则一定要借助于轮椅或是电动代步车。I have to use a wheelchair or mobility scooter when I'm out and about.”
It's hard for people to talk about organ donation, but for people like me and many others that are waiting for a heart, that conversation could save our lives, she said.
他说：“我知道人们很难讨论器官捐赠的话题，但是对于像我这样的人以及其他正在等待心脏移植的人来说，Conversation could save our life. 这样的讨论可能拯救我们的生命。Many others.
Heart transplant waiting lists reach record high, with doubling in number waiting. Heart transplant waiting lists are at a record high, with the numbers waiting more than doubling in a decade. Experts said the number of heart donations is failing to keep pace with growing demand and advances in medicine which are keeping some patients on the list for longer. The annual figures show 295 patients waiting, up from 126 in 2010, with an average wait of 3 years to transplant. More than 200 people have died in the last 5 years while waiting for such operations. Ministers today pleaded for more families to discuss donations ahead of changes to law on organ donation, which will take place next year. From next year, England and Scotland will move to a system of opt-out donation, with consent presumed unless people record a decision not to donate. John Maingay, Director of Policy at the British Heart Foundation, said,
said,
Hundreds of people across the country are on the waiting list for a heart transplant at any one time, and sadly, not everyone will receive the transplant that they desperately need. The introduction of the law in England and Scotland means we will switch to a soft opt-out system, which will provide much hope for those on the heart transplant waiting list. Lindsay Fitzpatrick, 34, from the World, will have been waiting for 3 years on Saturday. She said, I have had health problems my whole life. Throughout my life, I have struggled with my mobility, breathlessness, and exhaustion on a daily basis. I have to use a wheelchair or mobility scooter when I'm out and about. I know it is hard for people to talk about organ donation, but for people like me and many others that are waiting for a heart, that conversation could save our lives, she said.